I'm an optimist on this, Ian, because I think the overall logic for both sides is that they want the deal. The United States needs to go focus on China. And the one issue that could get it into a war in the Middle East is Iran's nuclear program. Obama understood that. I think Biden understands that. And you can saber rattle, you can put pressure on them. But in the end, if you want to reduce tensions, it has to begin with a nuclear deal with Iran.
Welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer. It's often called a quagmire for U.S. foreign policy, the Middle East. But as relations between Israel and Arab states open up, the dynamics in the region are changing rapidly. What should America's role be there? And how can President Biden get out of a rabbit hole that has stymied so many U.S. leaders before? We're talking about all that today with leading Middle East expert, Vali Nasr. Later, a Lebanese social media project goes viral with a simple message: the world sucks, make it better. Here's a few landmark dates in the modern history of the Middle East. 1948, the establishment of the State of Israel. 1967, the Six-Day War between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. 1981, U.S. hostages held in Iran released. The list goes on: peace deals, then a return to fighting, oil gushing from the Gulf states, boycott, and seemingly endless conflict in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. But one date you might not have marked on your calendar yet says a lot about where the region is heading today. November 8th, 2020. That was the first flight of Israeli tourists landing at Dubai International Airport. A clear sign that the floodgates had opened following the Abraham Accords. Objectively, one of the biggest foreign policy achievements for the Trump administration.
Everybody said this would be impossible.
Normalization of diplomatic relations between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan.
This is just a really positive development for the region and for the world.
But the Accords were also a recognition of three realities that were already playing out. First, the Arab-Israeli conflicts that defined that part of the world in the 20th century, for now at least, are not a headline. Second, the plight of Palestinians has been largely ignored in recent years by Israel and Arab states alike. And third, the growing power of Turkey and mounting regional tensions with Iran, each drawing new ideological battle lines. Like the two presidents before him, Joe Biden is eager to shift focus and resources east, namely to China, and the growing competition that it presents. But there are some loose ends to tie up first, to say the least. Decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, an early military strike against Iranian-supported militias in Syria, while trying to find a path back to the nuclear deal championed by President Obama and abandoned by President Trump. And Turkey, a NATO member that's only moving further away from its Western allies. What will the U.S. role in the Middle East be under President Biden, and what pitfalls await us all as power shifts in the region? That's the topic of today's big conversation. Professor Vali Nasr, great to be with you, sir. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Ian.
So you wrote recently in Foreign Policy that the Arab moment has passed. What did you mean by it?
Well, I meant that the Arabs are not really deciding the geostrategy of the region. They're not the strongest players right now. After the U.S. invasion of Iraq and the events of the Arab Spring, the bigger players like Iraq, Syria, Egypt lost their footing. They've collapsed. The smaller players like Saudi Arabia and UAE are not capable of carrying a significant military diplomatic weight in the region. Saudi Arabia could not or finish off the war in Yemen. So they are heavily reliant on the United States in order to stay in the game. But the way in which we used to look at the Arabs as being the center of gravity of the region, deciding its, the power balance in the region, and then everybody else was around them, is no longer the case. They're actually subject to other people's rivalries. And Israel, Turkey, and Iran each are trying to eat up parts of it. And so we're in a different game. And I have a feeling that the thinking in Washington and in the West generally is still stuck in a period where the Arabs were the center of the Middle East.
Certainly, historically, the United States has been pretty comfortable with an Arab-heavy Middle East in the sense that for the last few decades anyway, the U.S. relations have been reasonably strong. Do you think that this new period geopolitically is going to be considerably more destabilizing as a consequence?
Yes, it could be, because you actually have a massive Arab territory that is up for grabs, and the Arabs themselves are not capable of laying claim to it. So look at Syria. The Saudis, UAE, Qatar, pretty much packed up. The countries that matter in Syria are Israel, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. Even in Libya, it's now increasingly becoming Turkey versus Russia. And everywhere they're complaining about Iran, and then they're complaining about Turkey. So the suggestion is that the Arabs themselves cannot actually protect the territories that are broken up. And these outsiders are engaged in a scramble for Arab lands. And so that scramble is going to create more and more instability. We're seeing, Israel and Iran going at it in Syria, daily, sometimes weekly bombings by Israelis over Iranian positions. We're seeing Iran and Turkey getting into loggerheads in the Caucasus, in Syria, and now most recently in Iraq. And we're seeing, Israel and Turkey also, not on the best of terms when it comes to division of power in the Mediterranean. So if this kind of a rivalry goes unchecked, while the United States think it's all about Iran, we're going to end up seeing instability in places that we don't expect.
Does the United States think it's all about Iran, or does the United States increasingly just think it's not all about the Middle East?
Well, the United States is thinking it's not all about the Middle East. In fact, now this is the third president in a row who basically says we are overspending on the Middle East, diplomatically, financially, militarily. Our attention should be in China. And, President Obama had a strategy, which was you cut a nuclear deal with Iran, which was the most likely reason we would have stayed in the Middle East with another war, in order to pivot to Asia. And clearly, President Biden cannot afford to stay in the Middle East. We have too many other things domestically and with China to be focused on the Middle East. But in order to leave the Middle East, the United States has to find ways to reduce tensions in the Middle East. And so there are two ways of doing it. Either you say we're going to get out of the way and let the Iranians, Turks, and Israelis sort it out. Doesn't matter what's going to happen. Or that you have to try to find a way to reduce this degree of competition. And you have to arrive at some kind of a balance of power politics between these four components here.
How do you assess early trajectory of this Biden administration on the Middle East?
So I think they do want to reduce the importance of Middle East in terms of foreign policy priorities somewhere down below. To number 5, number 6, but definitely not number 1. So the recalibration of policy with Saudi Arabia is a very powerful signal to the kingdom that you need to play ball with your adversaries in the region, because we're not necessarily going to be bailing out every policy you want. So we're going to treat you like every other country, no more special access to the Oval Office, and you need to finish the war in Yemen. And we're not going to keep funding or supporting the continuation of that war. So that's also almost like telling the Arabs that, you need to get along with your adversaries. It's almost a repetition of what President Obama told Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic. You got to find a way to coexist with Iran in your own region. With Turkey, the administration actually has not revealed its hand. It hasn't come up with the way in which it's going to deal with Turkey. Now, Iran has become much more complicated.
So, I want to get into the Iranian deal and the role that Iran is likely to play here. But Turkey and Russia, how aligned do you see them in terms of their orientation as outsiders whose countries at home are not doing so well right now, both strongmen leaders dealing with economic challenges that are real? One, a NATO ally, at least nominally, though frequently a lot of people raising questions of that. The other, a principal adversary of the United States. Talk a little bit about that.
So, they both have now ambitions in the Middle East that they didn't have in an earlier era for different reasons. I think for Erdogan, that idea of reasserting the Ottoman claims to the Arab lands is part of his whole view of himself and the way he wants the Turks to see him. The Russians have different, agenda. It partly has to do with Islamic extremism, partly it's opportunistic, but also that's part of the Russian perceptions of grandeur. But the danger here is that Turkey has become quite unpredictable. It's become a major disruptor. It's basically lashing out at all directions. And it's difficult for Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United States, even Russia to think what is Erdogan's next step. So I think managing that, or at least being cognizant of how important that is important to the United States. And that's one of the issues that we have to think about. It's not about Iran anymore. Iran is a big player in the Middle East, but there are two other gorillas. And we actually don't have a handle on where Turkey is going in the Middle East. If it comes to a blow, either with Israel, with Iran, with Russia, in one of these, what does it mean for NATO? Let's say if in Libya, Russia and Turkey come to blows, what does that mean? Which is a very bizarre country, which is part of NATO, but is also acting like a Middle East power broker now.
Okay, so I want to end with Iran because, of course, to the extent that the Biden administration is really expending headspace in the Middle East right now, it certainly appears to be a desire to remake what was one of the landmark foreign policy agreements, breakthroughs, whether you like it or you don't like it, of the Obama administration, as you say, the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, I look at Iran right now and I see a country that is under massive economic stress, that would certainly have all sorts of incentives to get back into the old deal as it was. And I've seen lots of statements from Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, and others that appear to be pretty aligned with that. So tell me why that won't happen.
I think, the expectations the Iranians had was that the U.S. basically, in the spirit of undoing Trump's anti-multilateralism, just like it went back to the climate accord, it would announce that it's coming inside JCPOA, and then, would demand full compliance, and the Iranians would demand full compliance. So Iranians were looking for a quick way to go back to 2017, let's say, just before maximum pressure. But that didn't happen. Didn't happen because maybe there's domestic pressure on the administration. Maybe the administration could not trust the Iranians would do this. But also the Trump years are also wasted years because some of the provisions of the deal will actually finish under President Biden's term in 2023. So the U.S.'s worry is that if we went back into restore the deal and we lift sanctions and went back to 2017, we basically will have no leverage to get Iranians engaged in further conversations about extending sunset clauses, etc. And I do think that the Iranians have come to the conclusion that the United States doesn't really take their nuclear program serious enough. It doesn't show urgency of going back in the deal. And that they have to have something to really get U.S.'s attention for serious lifting of sanctions, and they don't believe that they have that now. So they've come to a resolution that JCPOA is not going to be restored anytime soon. But in the meantime, they are keeping the pressure on the United States of saying we're going to enrich more, hitting missiles into Iraq. And so the U.S. basically now has to come up with a diplomatic strategy of how are you going to get back at least into, direct conversations and stop the process where it is. Yep. The other issue is very important, Ian, is really how sustainable is the economic pressure in Iran. And this is a sensitive calibration because the U.S. may overread in that. The question is, can the Iranians survive another year? Can they survive another 6 months? During which time the size of their enriched uranium becomes a lot bigger. I would say yes. I think in their psychology, the greatest pain was at the beginning. The massive shock of inflation, unemployment, hardship was already hit, which caused street riots and rattled the regime right after. But right now, they don't see this as regime threatening right away.
I'm getting the sense that if, gun to your head, as they say, if you had to make a call, you think that the U.S. and Iran will get back into the Iranian nuclear deal?
I'm an optimist on this, Ian, because I think the overall logic for both sides is that they want the deal. The United States needs to go focus on China. And the one issue that could get it into a war in the Middle East is Iran's nuclear program. Obama understood that. I think Biden understands that. And you can saber rattle, you can put pressure on them. But in the end, if you want to reduce tensions, it has to begin with a nuclear deal with Iran. And I think the Iranians, yes, they can survive this another 6 months. They can survive it maybe maximally a year, maybe more. But ultimately, they want these sanctions lifted. They've said that multiple times. Even the supreme leader said there's a priority to lifting of sanctions. So both sides have to deal with pride, with nationalism, and with their domestic constituencies. And I think one of the things the U.S. has to be very careful is that, particularly what it says in public, it shouldn't corner Iranians. If you want diplomacy to succeed, you have to leave a ladder for the opponent to be able to climb down from the tree. So I think that's where we have to get the mechanics right. But if we do it, I do think that there could be a resolution.
That's the final word. Vali Nasr, he knows a lot about the Middle East. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me in.
Now to another story out of the Middle East that caught our eye. Do random acts of kindness still exist? One viral social media project out of Beirut is banking on it.
I feel that the world doesn't suck for me, so I need to make other people feel that the world shouldn't suck for them too. My name is Bob. I'm from Beirut, Lebanon, and I work for The World Sucks. The World Sucks is a social experiment channel that uses hidden cameras to surprise people, and the objective of it is to show you that the world doesn't suck. My name is not really Bob. The reason why you can't see my face is because if I'm gonna surprise someone, we go up to somebody,
I love her.
a low-paid person, and ask him for something free. For example, we ask a taxi driver for a free ride, and then when he gives us the free ride, we give him money in exchange. But then, in exchange, we ask of him to do something nice for someone else. Why? To pay it forward, so that we can get this chain of goodness going from people to another person. I want the audience to be surprised the same way that I am surprised when I film this video, to show them that humanity is there. We might think that 50% of the people are good, but I can assure you more than 80 or 90% of the people are good, at least in Lebanon. The response on social media was amazing. There was so much support, so many people that wanted to do the same and that want to help. There's actually a WhatsApp group for 1,000 volunteers right now that are ready to help anytime.
Parts of Beirut are in ruins after a massive explosion.
The explosion was a horror. What happened during the explosion was really catastrophic. What happened after was a big shine of hope, because if you went to the streets and saw how many people were there to help, giving in Lebanon is something very, very normal. People are giving free things even though they have nothing. We have many people all around Lebanon filming videos and sending it to the page, and we call them the subscribers, like a subscriber. We call them the subscriber. They film videos and they send it to us, and they show humanity in all Lebanon. So we hope to have it in the whole world. That's why it's called The World Sucks, not Lebanon Sucks. To have people all around the world doing videos like this, and to be able to show how humanity is present all over the world. So if anyone wants to join the cause, just send us a message. We'll be more than happy to have you.
Merci.
That's our show this week. Come back next week. And if you like what you see, and of course you do, where else can you learn exactly what's going on across the entirety of the Middle East in just half an hour? That's right, it's GZERO World. Take a minute, sign up for GZERO's excellent morning newsletter. It's called Signal.